Thank you for joining us for this Shabbat, and we join the discussion in progress. Our Shabbat Parshas, we have two Shabbat Parshas for this week. One is called Tazria, and that's called She Conceives, and it's taken from Leviticus 12th chapter, verse 1 through Leviticus 13th chapter, verse 59. And the second Parsha is called Metzora, Leper, from Leviticus 14th chapter, 1st verse through Leviticus 15th chapter, 33rd verse. And the Tazria reads, V'yadaveh Adonai el Moshe lamor deber el bnei Yisrael lamor ish Tazria v'yelda zakar v'tameh shiv'at yamim kimi nedat dota titma. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be unclean 7 days. She shall be unclean as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. On the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. And Tazria from Leviticus 13 reads, Metzora from Leviticus 14 reads, V'yadaveh Adonai el Moshe lamor, Zot tihiyeh Torat ha-Mitzra beyom taharuto vehuba el ha-Kohen. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the ritual for a leper at the time that he is to be clean.
Psalm 30. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up, and have not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried out to you, and you healed me. O Lord, you brought my soul up from the grave. You have kept me alive, that I should not go down to the pit. Sing praise to the Lord, you saints of his, and give thanks at the remembrance of his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Now in my prophecy I said, prosperity, I said, I shall never be moved. Lord, by your favor you have made my mountains stand strong. You hide your face, and I was troubled. You hid your face, and I was troubled. I cried out to you, O Lord. And the Lord I made and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it declare your truth? Hear, O Lord, and have mercy on me. Lord, be my helper. You have turned from me my mourning into dancing. You have put off my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness, to the ends that my glory may sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. This is the word of the Lord. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come. May your will be done. May your will be done on earth, Lord, as it has been done in heaven. And we give thanks to you, Lord, for your greatness, for your mercy that never ends, for redeeming your people from sin, from your children, from the children of Israel from Egypt, delivering them out of the house of bondage into freedom, and giving them a gracious land. And you have brought us out from the bondage of sin and paying a price that we could not pay. And we rejoice with our Jewish brothers. We rejoice in freedom and give thanks and glory to the God who saves and delivers. And you have welcomed us in your presence, Lord, and we welcome you into our presence. And in your presence you have made known how you are to be worshipped. And we are to acknowledge that you are perfect, and in you are no defect. And those who approach you must be without defects as well. And we learn how this is done, how you have made this possible through your word and teaching. Create in us, Lord, a clean heart and a glad heart to be saved by the God of heaven. This we pray and give thanks in the name of our Christ Jesus, and in the Spirit, and the Father. Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem means ha'am. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives us bread from the earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Berei pri hagafen. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, well, I'll serve the first course. I always like to serve the first course. I don't want to change.
The first one's short, so maybe I'll read the first one.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, let me just give a little introduction, and then you can take off and read that. We're going to start with the first, and Tazria, she conceives, and just a brief synopsis on that. Blood is regarded as holy because it is the carrier of life. And the life of the flesh is in the blood, and blood outside the body is symbolic of death, bloodshed. Sacrifice blood is applied to the altar to make atonement. Because it is connected with life and death, various taboos are associated with it. Blood cannot be consumed. Blood is a potential source of ritual impurity, and women became pure because of its presence, and so on. Now, this is taken from the Hebrew for Christian discussion topics. So, we're going to do things a little bit different tonight. John is going to start out, and he's going to read from the Torah about Tazria. And then we are going to read from the Haftorah for both Tazria and for Metzora, and that's the leper. So, John, it's in your hands.
Chapter 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a woman has conceived and bore a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her customary impurities, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or turtle doves as a sin offering, to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then he shall offer it before the Lord, and make atonement for her, and she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who has borne a male or female. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, then she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a burnt offering and the other as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. Quite a bit's going on here, and I think I've listened to a couple of commentaries, and I think some are kind of all over the place with it. But the one that makes the most sense to me, and these are the notes I've taken, the one that makes the most sense is that although it said it's a sin offering, but there's no sin per se that's taking place here. This is giving birth is one of the normal activities of life, and also I think it rings true because there was no mention of a sin offering during the conception or during the carrying of the child. In fact, the lady was not I suppose while she was still pregnant, she could still go into the sanctuary. It was only after childbirth. So this bearing a child or giving birth to a child must point to something else. And that something else, that something is lost. Something something is outside the norm and needs to be restored. So what was lost in this part was the blood during the act of childbirth, and it promotes some type of deficiency or some kind of incompleteness, where with God with dwelling with His people is complete and perfect. So when the lady gives birth, she's not complete anymore because she's lost something, and what she's lost, I don't want to say she lost a child, but she's lost a lot of blood, and that's what makes her impure. Now, some of the comments I did make said that this chapter has nothing to do with sin itself. It has to do with losing something of a life-giving nature. And part of the commentary that Judy just mentioned was life was in the blood, and this is what is lost during childbirth. Making her incomplete. She lost a lot of blood, and I think that because during the entire child development process, no offering of any kind was made. Since God is holy and complete, so should we be. It reaffirms God's perfect order of how things should be. And when we lose blood in this sense, we do not conform to this perfect order of God and how God has created us. And doing so, if we are incomplete, we should not be in sacred places until we've been restored. Why does it take so long to be restored? Well, restoration takes time. It's not instant. But God did restore her. God will restore us after so many days. Why either 30, technically with guys it's 40 days, and women it's 80 days. Not sure the significance, but restoration is not instant. It takes time. That's pretty much the notes I have, at least for that chapter is concerned.
That's very good. I learned a lot from what you just said. And now, I don't know if you remember this conversation. A lot of times when we're discussing the Torah Parshah, because it is God's manual as to how we are to behave, to have a relationship with Him and to have a relationship with other men, it gives us a chance to make commentary on what's happening in the world around us today. And we see that it is contrary to what God has commanded. And I was speaking with John the other day about something I saw in the news where they thought they had found life on Mars. And the life they found was like a microbe. And I thought it ironic, and I'm not the first one to say this because I had read this somewhere else. We go looking for life on a distant planet and we will settle for finding a microbe and we call it life. But inside of a woman's womb, she is producing some of the greatest life and some of the most complex life that there is on planet Earth, and yet we disregard it, so much so that we allow abortion. We say the child in the womb is nothing compared to a microbe on Mars. And it didn't make sense to me, as I'm sure it doesn't to a lot of people, that we would esteem a microbe on Mars and so not esteem this wonderful life in the womb of a mother, that God has obviously taken time out to say how this life is to be, how the woman is to be treated after the birth, and what's to happen to the child in terms of the circumcision of the foreskin. So I just found that interesting, and I thought I'd throw that in there in our discussion. Now what we'll do, John, is we'll go to the Haftarah, which is taken from 2 Kings, 4th chapter, verse 42 to chapter 5, verse 19. And it has practical implication to the Torah reading, Torah Parshah, Tazria. A man came from Baal Shalisha, and he brought the man of God some bread of the first reaping, 20 loaves of barley bread, and some fresh grain in his sack. And Elisha said, "Give it to the people and let them eat." His attendant replied, "How can I set this before 100 men?" But he said, "Give it to the people and let them eat, for thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over." So he set it before them, and when they had eaten, they had some left over, as the Lord had said. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was important to his Lord and high in his favor, for through him the Lord had granted victory to Aram. But the man, though a great warrior, once when the Arameans were out raiding, they carried off a young woman from the land of Israel, and she became an attendant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish master could come before the prophet in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went out and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go to the king of Israel, and I will send along a letter." Set out, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing, he brought the letter to the king of Israel. It read, "Now when this letter reaches you, you know that I have sent my courier, Naaman to you, and you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he rent his clothes and cried, "Am I God to deal death or give life, that this fellow writes to me to cure a man of leprosy? Just see for yourselves that he is seeking a pretext against me." When Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you rent your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angered and walked away and walked away. "I thought," he said, "he would surely come out to me and would stand and invoke the Lord his God by name, and would wave his hand toward the spot and cure the affected part. Are not the Amana and the Farfar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the rivers of Israel? I could bathe in them and be clean." And he stalked off enraged. So he went down, but his servants came forward and spoke to him. "Sir," they said, "if the prophet told you to do something difficult, would you not do it? How much more when he has only said to you, 'Bathe and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself in the Jordan River 7 times, as the man of God had bidden, and his flesh became like a little boy's, and he was clean. Returning with his entire retinue to the man of God, he stood before him and exclaimed, "Now I know that there is no God in the whole world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." But he replied, "As the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept anything." He pressed him to accept, but he refused. And Naaman said, "Then at least let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant would never again offer a burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant for this. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow low and worship there, and he is leaning on my arm so that I must bow low in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow low in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this. And he said to him, Go in peace. And he had gone some distance from him. And this particular Haftarah, this particular Haftarah talks about blood impurity, and then it goes on to talk about leprosy, which is considered a very dire condition, afflicting the skin, and so the Torah is explicit in how this is to be taken care of, because this was indeed a dire condition. It was because the person's very flesh is eaten away in this condition of leprosy. So this is this part of the Torah is dealing with this, and here we have a practical application because we see that it was dire because Naaman was trying to seek help from wherever he could to be healed of this affliction, and so this is what that particular portion of the Torah is about. Do you have any comments on this particular part, John?
Well, only, I guess the one commentator would take kind of an issue with that, because this dealt with people inside the covenant community who had leprosy. And yeah, it was a dire condition, and was not treatable. There was no treatment other than a healing.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with the person, though, if they were declared to have leprosy, it was treated as if they had died, because they were put outside the camp, outside of the blessings of God.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this leprosy was very similar to verse 13, in that there's some impurity in play here. So the person is not whole.
Mm-hmm.
There's some defect, and they're put outside the camp because of the defect, and also because they can be, I'm going to say contagious. It could be spread. So they were outside of the blessing, and it was just like a death until they were healed. But the leprosy was primarily a death sentence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we mentioned it or talked about it, but once they were healed, certain things were done. They went to the priest.
Right.
But the King's version doesn't talk about that, I guess partly because it wasn't a Jewish person, it was a Gentile person.
Mm-hmm.
Other than it was just a debilitating disease, a lot of isolation, and I guess one point is the restoration was pretty immediate here with him.
Mm-hmm.
And but they were not under the same protocol that the Jews were under. So his was, well, all healing is somewhat immediate. It's a matter of getting confirmation. But yeah, he was restored, and the restoration came from God. So yes, he had a defect or an imperfection, and that imperfection had to be resolved so he could be reunited with his people.
Yeah.
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 Or restored to the community.
Restored, right, it's restored.
In the individual.
It's about restoration.
Yeah.
With a dire condition, yeah. I like this in the Hebrew for Christians, one of the discussion questions. He talks about, and in the New Testament it does talk about leprosy a lot. You see the lepers, when they see Yeshua, Jesus crying out to him, wanting to be healed, because it was a death sentence. It's such a dire condition.
Mhm.
And in the Hebrew for Christian, it talks of it takes it a step further. The leprosy of the body, also it compares it to our spiritual impurity, where Jesus alone is able to cleanse us from that spiritual impurity, so that we can again be restored. It's about restoration. A death sentence, like you said, it's a death sentence. Leprosy is a death sentence, and so is sin. Sin is a death sentence. It's a death sentence, and
right.
Go ahead.
Now this some sins or we play an active role in, and some we don't. Some of these sins just a natural occurrences in life. No one goes out and commits a certain act and he gets leprosy. These are just certain biological things that come about, and I have no idea how a person gets leprosy. I'm not even sure they know, but it's some type of skin disease. And so it's not as if you got, like stealing, you know, that's a purposeful act. But leprosy is probably not purposeful unless you go up to a leper and you want to get it, but that's probably something you just don't do in a normal course of your daily activity.
But that let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to trap you or nothing like that, but it may go back to talking about birth, childbirth. When we are born, we're born into sin.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Correct.
And so when we're born, it's a death sentence unless we have a covering for our sin. And it's not we didn't do anything to be born. We were born. Mm-hmm. Like you said, with leprosy, you don't go unless you purposely go out to get leprosy. But when we didn't do anything to be born, but we are born, and we are born with a death sentence over us. A death sentence physically and a death sentence spiritually.
Okay.
And so the remedy to the death sentence, spiritually and physically, is, well, physically we're going to die, but in terms of we will be restored if we have, I don't want to get too deep, but anyway, the fact that we accept Jesus or Yeshua as our covering, it does two things. It heals us from our sin state, and it also, yes, it says the point for man wants to die, but in the next life, because of his covering, we will have a eternal body that we can commune and be with him. So maybe this is a little more deeper in terms of why the formula for the woman who's given birth, because it's almost like a death sentence when you are born. It is a death sentence. It's as ironic as that scene. You've given life, and it's a fresh baby and everything, but it's a baby born into sin.
Okay.
So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. I wasn't trying to.
Oh, I thought you had a question.
No, it was just a statement. I didn't know if it would bring anything out with you, but our death sentence starts the time we come out of our mother's womb. That's our death sentence.
Yes, I think this one's more to talk about the woman itself and child and giving birth. Mm-hmm. But yeah, even with us being born, yeah, there's a death sentence because we're not perfect. Mm-hmm. And we're not complete. And that perfection and completeness only occurs through Christ and in the next life. Mm-hmm. So yes, we can't. I was thinking about that. We can't. God doesn't want imperfection in His holy temple, or people who are incomplete. Mm-hmm. I think this also extends to could not be a person with one hand or blind in one
Right.
eye or anything like that.
Right.
So, if the guy only had one arm, that was no fault of his. He may have been born with one arm.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of completeness reigns, is what these 3 chapters are talking about. And completeness in the sense that you have no control over them.
Mm-hmm.
They were set in place as a normal course of events. You had no control over them, and God still, even though you have no control over them, God is a God of perfection and completeness, and He wants to be worshipped in that sense by those who are perfect. Well, I'm going to say those who are complete. I shouldn't say perfect, but yeah, even we are born in sin, and that's the reason for the sin offering. And even though that's why the sin offering and the burnt offerings are offered, not because of any particular sin the woman had engaged in, but the idea of completeness and perfection. So, I went back and forth on those just verses. Okay, but that's about all I have for that one.
Okay. Okay, then what we're going to do is then we're going to see the next Torah, and I'll tell you what, the next Torah portion is also dealing with leprosy, Metzora, and from Leviticus 14:1. Let's see what if that will give us a little bit of a Leviticus 14:1. Metzora 14:1-15. Tell you what, 14:1. It's 14. Okay. And this is, tell you what, let's go with the Torah, and I believe if we need to refer back to Leviticus, we will. But the Torah for Metzora, which means leper, is from 2 Kings 7th chapter, verse 3 through 20. And it has, I kind of like this one, so I think it's a practical application. And then we'll see what, maybe we'll ask a question. Okay. All right. And it says, there were 4 men, lepers, outside the gate. They said to one another, why should we sit here waiting for death? For if we decide to go into the town, what is with the famine in the town? We shall die there, and if we just sit here, still we die. Come, let us desert to the Aramean camp. If they let us live, and we shall live, and if they put us to death, we shall but die. They set out at twilight for the Aramean camp, but when they came to the edge of the Aramean camp, there was no one there. For the Lord had caused the Aramean camp to hear a sound of chariots, a sound of horses, the din of a huge army. They said to one another, the king of Israel must have hired the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Mizraim to attack us. And they fled headlong into the twilight, abandoning their tents and horses and asses, and the entire camp just as it was, as they fled for their lives. And when those lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into one of the tents and ate and drank, and then they carried off silver and gold and clothing from there and buried it. They came back and went into another tent and they carried off what was there and buried it. Then they said to one another, "We are not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping silent. If we wait until the light of the morning, we shall incur guilt. Come, let us go and inform the king's palace." They went and called out to the gatekeepers at the city and told them, "We have been to the Aramean camp. There is not a soul there, nor any human sound, but the horses are tethered and the asses are tethered, and the tents are undisturbed." The gatekeepers called out, and the news was passed on into the king's palaces. The king rose in the night and said to his courtiers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know that we are starving, so they have gone out of the camp and hidden in the fields, thinking, when they come out of the town, we will take them alive and get into the town." But one of the courtiers spoke up, "Let a few of the remaining horses that are still here be taken. They are like those that are left here of the whole multitude of Israel, out of the whole multitude of Israel that have perished, and let us send and find out." And they took 2 teams of horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army, saying, "Go and find." And they followed them as far as the Jordan, and found the entire road full of clothing and gear which the Arameans had thrown away in their haste. And the messengers returned and told the king. The people then went out and plundered the Aramean camp. So a seah of choice flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, as the Lord had spoken. Now the king had put the aide on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and he was trampled to death in the gate by the people, just as the man of God had spoken, and as he had spoken when the king came down to him. For when the man of God said to the king, "This time tomorrow, 2 seahs of barley shall sell at the gate of Samaria for a shekel, and a seah of choice flour for a shekel," the aide answered the man of God and said, "Even if the Lord had made windows in the sky, could this come to pass?" And he retorted, "You shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it." That is exactly what happened to him. The people trampled him to death in the gates. And here again, we have this leprosy thing. And as I was reading the leprosy, again, it brought to mind that the leprosy was a death sentence. They were separated from the community. There was nothing that they could do about it. But it's like sin in the sense that we are separated from God because of our sin. And also, if you heard the expression, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch, that sin, unless it's remediated, it's infectious. It's just as infectious as leprosy.
Okay.
And again, it carries a death sentence. So anyway, that's what came to mind.
Okay. Well, I was thinking the 4 fellows outside the camp. Well, they were outside of the Israel community, and they were going to die. And they said, "Well, I guess they were going to go to the Gentiles." I don't know what made them think the Gentiles were going to take them in. Say, "Well, they may not take us in, but we're still going to die anyway."
Mm-hmm.
They'll give it a try.
So we got nothing to lose.
Yeah, got nothing. Pretty much what they say. We got nothing to lose. Don't know what happened to them after that, though. But yes, it is a death sentence. You're outside the community, outside the blessings of God, and I guess God used those lepers to fulfill prophecy. So it's not. They still, I suppose, still confirmed. Yes, they had leprosy, but it wasn't some disease that they brought onto themselves. This leprosy was used to fulfill prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Or to, pretty much had to fulfill a prophecy.
Well,
But that one that verse didn't talk about restoration or being restored per se. I guess first they weren't believed somewhat, but so they kind of tested it. Not like in 14 it talked about some restorations and what the priest does and the sin offering,
Right.
that kind of thing.
right. Once they're healed, they're restored back into the community. Healed from leprosy. And again, I guess in a greater sense, and I don't know if I'm globalizing it too much, that that we are trying to be restored.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole essence of what's happening, because we were, when I say we, Adam was thrown out of the Garden of Eden because of sin, and that's what happened to these leprosies. They were thrown out of the community because of their leprosy.
Yep.
And Adam's thrown out of the Garden of Eden, where he was able to commune with God because of sin. And so we need to be restored. In order to be able to be let back into the garden, so to speak. And the only restoration for us is, again, through the covering of the blood of Messiah Jesus.
It's through a sin offering, burnt offering, of that thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Once Adam was kicked out of the garden, he was no longer complete.
No longer.
Complete.
And could not be in the presence of God.
Yeah. Because God said, well, just because Adam is incomplete, it doesn't mean I'm going to pretend that I'm incomplete.
Exactly.
So I can still commune with him.
Yes.
He still has to be fully restored.
Made whole again.
Yeah, made whole again.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so I mean, it's all these rules and everything. I think you've narrowed it down. You've narrowed it down to what this is all about. It's about restoration, being cleansed and being restored.
Yeah, it's pointing a picture of God, and we can't simply say, well, God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. They weren't perfect then, they're not perfect now, and he set up the tabernacle for them to worship him there. And since they were not perfect when he came out, it's okay for imperfection to worship perfection. And here I think he's saying, no, that's not the case. There is a natural order. How did I write that? There's a perfect order that has been, I'm going to say, breached. And we do not conform to that perfect order of how God created us. Hence, we're not fit to worship in sacred space or in the temple. We're not fit to do that. What makes us fit is sacrifices and offerings. And this is what this is about. It's a picture showing us we're not fit to worship God in his temple. And he's showing us how we can go about doing that.
Yes.
Even nowadays, we can only do that through the sacrifice that Christ made.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Well, what we're going to do now, since we've done this a little different for various reasons, we're going to now partake of the Shabbat meal. And again, we we started the meal with the bread and the wine. And it has, again, that we are not restoring, we're we are, and I'm think of the word in a minute, we are, sanctified is a word that comes up, but we are, and I want to say negotiating, but it's not negotiating. We are, as we do each Shabbat, as they do with the meal, and the meal is so important in the Torah, in that it solidifies, it solidifies the covenant. And we're solidifying this covenant through this meal and through this seventh day who God hollowed out from the beginning of creation. And this meal is a sanctification of that covenant. And we partake of it in remembrance of that covenant. We partake of this meal as Israel did so many times, as they did when they went up into the mountain. The elders went up to the mountain to see God, and they partook of a meal. So many times this happened, even in bad things. When Joseph's brother, after they placed him in the pit, they sat down and ate a meal. It can be used in terms of a bad covenant also, but this is in terms of the covenant that God made with Israel and that God made at the beginning of creation on the seventh day. And so now we're going to partake of the meal, and if we have some discussion during it, I'll keep it in. If not, we'll come back and sing our closing song and close out the service. But now we're going to partake of the meal.
Chapter 15 did speak of, I guess, skin boils. Let me read part of it.
Okay.
And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. And this shall be the uncleanness in regard to his discharge. Whether his body runs with his discharge, or the body is stopped up by his discharge, it is uncleanness. Every bed is unclean on which he has the discharge lies, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. And whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And still, these discharges, probably just the natural things that happen in life. Nothing he did specifically to cause it, but still, it indicates the loss of something. It represents some type of something incomplete, some defect. And maybe I'll just start using that word. These things represent some type of defect that must be restored. And most are done through sin offerings, not because the person actually created was sinful because of its discharge, but primarily because of some defect in his body that needs to be addressed, needs to be sacrificed for. And I don't want to get too deep in saying, well, there was some sin that was going on. Not necessarily that at all.
But it was some defect.
Some defect that was in his body that caused some type of imperfection. And we don't worship God in a defect way, but we worship in a pure way. Some, I think New Testament says we worship in spirit and in truth.
Right.
So in truth there is no defect. So it's still getting back to the point that God is holy. He is complete. He is without defect. And he paints a picture that he is to be worshipped in that same way, even through the things in life where you have absolutely no control over whatsoever.
Right. But the only way to worship him, I'm asking a question, I'm not. Then the only way to worship him in spirit and in truth is if there's something that changes our sin nature.
Right, something makes us complete.
Because we can't come to him, based on what you said, we can't come to him as we came out of our mom's womb. There has to be something added in order to make us complete enough to go have communion with him.
Yes, something has to be done on our behalf to make us complete. Because there's no way we're going to know what we are. If we're incomplete, there's no way we're going to know what the missing parts are.
What completes us. Right?
Yeah, what completes that.
So it's just like with making idols, like with the golden calf. If they're trying to get to God, the one true God, there's no way they're going to know what get them there, unless they had instructions.
Right.
And they didn't get that instruction to make that golden calf from the one true God.
Right.
They made that up on their own.
They don't know the way to God unless they know where God is. And there's no way they knew where God was. The only way to know where God is for God to tell us.
Where he is. So,
I think these were also ceremonial rituals and symbols. They pointed to something.
right.
But there's no way that, how was the woman? I think one company did mention that they're more ceremonial types of rituals that are going on here. Symbolic. But pretty much ceremonial types of things that are going on. No, that's it. Yeah, ceremonial rituals that are going on.
But all of them, again, are God's instructions on how to make us, to add that missing dimension so that we could come and worship him.
Yes. Remind that. The prior chapters talked about, I guess you mentioned, clean and unclean food that we should eat or not eat. Here we talk about things that make humans clean or unclean. Maybe I should say unclean as opposed to clean. And that there's still the everyday events in life that happen that you have almost no control over at all. God said, be fruitful and multiply. So reproduction in and of itself will not be sinful. There's nothing lost in reproduction, at least not until childbirth occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And that time you lose something. And some point to the blood that mothers lose. Some also point out that, well, a lot of women died in childbirth, in that, perhaps in that time. And after birth, they would want the women to have someone to watch over her, to make sure everything's going well for her. And maybe that was the reason for those different types of days and things. But why a male son would be 40 days and a female 80 days?
Well, I don't know where I got this from. I don't think I'm smart enough to get it on my own. And I think one of the reasons it had to do with the male being 40 days.
Yeah.
And then the female being double that.
Yeah.
Well, when a woman gives birth to a female, she's giving birth to someone who is able to give birth, who also have blood, who will have a menstrual cycle. So it's like two, it's not a sin, but if it's two of them, that she's making, I don't know if how much more she has to give. She has to give more for her, the daughter too, than the son. Do you remember? In the sacrifice, once the 80 days are passed.
No, the sacrifice is the same.
The same, but I know it has something to do with the fact that she's giving birth to a daughter who will herself bleed, who will have a menstrual cycle, and that's why it's twice as long as the male. The male won't have a menstrual cycle, so he won't bleed.
Yes, he will. Now that you mention it.
What? Oh, the circumcision. Monthly.
Right, but I think I like the bleeding part. So she will do it continuously. He will do it just one time.
Right.
So they both share in it. I don't know if that means anything. I don't even know if that has anything to do with it or not.
I had read a commentary one time. I know I didn't come up with it on myself. But that's why it's twice for the daughter.
Because she will bleed on a regular basis.
It has something to do with that.
Okay. Assuming she reaches womanhood.
Right.
Maybe. Okay. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe so.
One of the programs I get from Israel, and it's meant for children, and usually with a Parsha, 2 Parshas, I mean, it should be long, but it was only 6 minutes. And it mainly talked about leprosy. Maybe because of the Torah. Because, a lot of the things in the Torah that we read, that we didn't read tonight, but we may have read some other time, or what to do if you have a condition, and then what to do after the condition. And then it talked about when Miriam had leprosy. What happened when she got leprosy because they were
promotion.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you call it promotion or if you try and step ahead of Moses, I don't know. But again, it points out that leprosy causes you to be put outside of the community.
Right. It's like dying.
Yeah. Like that. and then that you're separated from the community. Because if you were in the community, you could infect the community. And maybe that's what God was talking about too a lot of time when he says if you do this, you'll be placed out of the community. Or he says you'll die.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that because if he leaves you in the community, you can infect the community.
Right. Mm-hmm.
With your sin, because then a monkey see kind of do thing.
Yeah.
If he leaves one person in the community because of that sin, then others say, oh well, he let them in sin. Well, I can do the same sin, and and so that's the lesson behind all of this. Is that God has to place you outside the community,
right,
for the protection of the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Wow. What strawberries from Upton?
Mm-hmm. Oh, they're sweet.
Yeah.
Mm.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they came from Tampa.
There's a piece of bread on the table, Bucky.
I know I was going to put it up so I could
Oh.
have it tomorrow.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, I'm having pancakes tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, I'll have some for dinner. Mm-hmm. Outside the camp, you destroyed the camp. But I didn't get the impression, at least from this reading, that the person who was infected was out there permanently. It was only out there temporarily.
Right, because there was a restoration if you were healed of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's all about protecting the nation, the people. And maybe that's what's happening in terms of, that's what's happening with what's going on around us, is that sin was allowed to stay in the camp.
Yeah.
And it was never dealt with in terms of what's going on today. I'm talking about modern could mean back then too. I mean, because there's nothing new under the sun, like Solomon said. But when you don't deal with sin, and when you allow it to stay in your midst and you don't deal with it, it infects the rest of the people of the group, and it gets to a point where the group can start feeling that it's okay,
right,
since you didn't you didn't deal with the sin with this one person, and the person's still in the camp. You didn't deal with it. You didn't call it sin, whatever. Then there it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. One person with leprosy could kill the
entire community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, something going on. How do you handle imperfections and stuff?
Yes.
In a broader sense, broader sense.
Right. Because not to do it, it may seem people may be squeamish about doing that, about calling out sin, but not to do it endangers the whole community. And not to do it is irresponsible, because you've given a death sentence to the whole community to allow a leper to remain within the community. It's a death sentence for the whole community. And
I want to mention also that the God we serve is a God of life, and I guess part of that life is not a God of death. but a God of life and works to restore. I guess if you wanted to save the community, someone with leprosy, just end their life. But God is not a God of death, He's a God of life. And that was, I guess, one reason they were separated from the community, to be restored when they have been restored.
But that's interesting though, because I think you mentioned that obviously that there was no well, how do you get cured from leprosy? Well, with Naaman, he went to Elisha, and Elisha told him to bathe in the Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you said is that God is not a God of death. What He did was you put him outside. Perchance there will be a cure, and then he whatever that form the cure comes in, and then He outlines once they're cured how they can be accepted back into the community.
Right.
So He's, by throwing them out didn't mean that He was assigning them a permanent death sentence, although leprosy can be it. But He gave them an opportunity to.
Mm.
So.
You still talking about Naaman?
Well, no. Well, I mentioned Naaman because he was cured of his leprosy.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the fact that God outlined what to do once you're cured, people were cured from leprosy. Now, how they, again, obviously they were cured because God outlined what to do if you are cured from the leprosy. And so.
No, I missed part of what you said. When they're cured from leprosy, they just go to the priest.
Right. So obviously, the fact that He, like you said, God could have easily said, "Oh, we're going to kill the lepers," but no, He just sets them outside the camp.
Right. Oh, okay.
Well, like in Naaman's, if Naaman were Jewish, he would be. I mean, he was cured of leprosy.
Right.
So he'd go to the priest, and the priest said, "Okay, all right, everything's okay according to Torah. You can come back into camp."
Right.
So God a second chance is what I hear, because He could easily say, "Okay, I'm going to kill you," but no, He gives them a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
Perchance there will be a cure for them. So their greatest thing, I mean, their hardest thing is probably be outside the camp, but once they're cured, they can come back in.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'm gonna sit in my chair.
Well, we have to close out.
Oh, I'm
Sit in
sorry.
your chair. We have to close out. We're not quite finished. You're gonna close out. But we had a different, a little different format, and maybe it worked well. It's not to say we're gonna do the same format all the time, but it worked well for this time. I think we just had a deep discussion, and I think we did pretty good. And so we. Hold on a minute. Let me tell you what the Torah portion is for this coming week. Okay, for this coming, okay, I don't have it here, so I'm going to have to go to my, let me make sure, let me go to my, yes, here's my calendar, nope, yes, here's my calendar. Okay, for this coming week, which would be May the 5th, and there are 2 Torah portions for this coming week also. So I'll remind you again during the week so that you can be prepared, but let's see. Let me get both of them. Okay. All right, there will be, let me get it so I can, it looks like it's pretty, unless it's all commentary. The first one is called Acharemut, And it begins in Leviticus 16th chapter, and it goes through, let's see, it goes through the 18th chapter and 30th verse, and it begins, וידבר אדוני אל משה אחרי מות שני בני אהרון וקרבותם לפני אדוני וימתו. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. And the second Parsha is called Kodoshim, and that begins in Leviticus 19th chapter. Let me make sure. Yes, 19th chapter, first verse, and it starts out, וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל כל עדת בני ישראל ואמרת אלוהים קדשים תהיה כי קודש אני אדוני אלוהיכם. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And I think this speaks to what we were talking about today, that God is holy and He can't abide sin in His presence. And so we have those two Parsha for the coming week. All right, and so in order to close out, we'll usually sing a hymn, and I think we'll sing just a simple praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him, all of ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for joining us for this Shabbat, and we hope you enjoyed the discussion. We look forward to seeing you next Shabbat for Acharemut and Kodashim. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, have a good week. Thank you.